This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Pressburg. I am the Algemeiner's CEO. Very excited to be joined today by our DC correspondent, Andrew Bernard. Andrew's only been with the Algemeiner for a short time, but in that time, he's made a very strong impact. He's going to spend a few minutes today talking about his reporting and what he's been covering for us here in the DC area, where both he and I are based. And then after that, we'll be happy to take your questions. Please submit your questions anytime throughout the conversation using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, and I'll jump back in and read them off for Andrew. And should be a really interesting conversation. We'll have him speak for about 15, 18 minutes, and then take Q&A and get you back to your day. With that, Andrew, please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. My name's Andrew Bernard. I'm the Washington correspondent for the Algemeiner. I joined in September. I cover everything from U.S. domestic policy, U.S. foreign policy, the Middle East, with a particular focus on, particular focus on the Middle East, Israel, and the Abraham Accords, the ongoing attempt to normalize relations between Israel and the Arab countries. So I wanted to talk today about, the title of this talk is The View from Washington. So three things: where the U.S.-Israel relationship stands, the ongoing efforts to negotiate a diplomatic agreement with Iran to resolve its nuclear program or keep its nuclear program in check, and the negotiations, particularly with Saudi Arabia, to expand the Abraham Accords and bring additional countries into the fold of peace with Israel. So starting with U.S.-Israel, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu entered office shortly before the beginning of the new year, at the end of December. It is described both by its own members as well as its detractors as the most right-wing government in Israel's history. That is, I think it would be safe to say, an uncomfortable position for the Biden administration and for Democrats in general to be in. They'd prefer to be working with a center-left government. That much is clear. The Biden administration has been very outspoken about its opposition to the Israeli judicial reforms, has been very cautious in dealing with Benjamin Netanyahu and the government in particular. Their phone call yesterday was an interesting example of that. So Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to get an invitation to the White House, which is a typical feather in the cap for an Israeli leader. The announcement yesterday after their phone call was that he will have a meeting with President Biden in the United States. They did not say where that meeting will take place. It will just happen this year somewhere in the United States. It was not, in fact, an invitation to the White House. And that is, I think, reflective of where the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party base are heading. There was a poll in March from Gallup that showed that for the first time in the history of that poll, which I believe has been conducted for decades, among Democratic respondents, those polled now hold a net negative view of Israel by an 11-point margin. They favor Palestinians over Israelis in the conflict by a 49 to 38-point margin. Now, when I spoke with Democratic Majority for Israel groups that are supportive of the Democratic Party and also supportive of Israel, they would make 2 points. One is that the party itself is still, the leaders of the party are still in lockstep in support of Israel and support of Israel's security. But they acknowledge that, that support is slipping in the grassroots, and particularly on their left flank. So you saw this with, there was a resolution recognizing the 75th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel that passed by a resounding 401 to 19 margin in the House of Representatives, but still 19 votes against when that virtually the same resolution was passed at the 50th anniversary of the founding of the state of Israel 25 years ago. That resolution passed unanimously. So there is an ongoing shift. It's also clear that the progressive sort of left wing of the Democratic Party, exemplified by the Squad, want to consider it normal or to normalize the phrase and the terminology that Israel is an apartheid state, that it is now, or in some cases, depending on which group you ask, has always been engaged in a policy of apartheid against the Palestinian people. You see that in the 4 congressmen who have said that they'll boycott the address tomorrow of Israel's President Isaac Herzog to Congress. And you increasingly see it playing out among Jewish groups, that the leading Jewish groups are, while they would say, for example, that it is ipso facto anti-Semitic to say that Israel is racist, or that Zionism is racism, as the famous UN resolution said, they're not quite ready to say the same thing about claiming that Israel is engaged in apartheid. They'll call it a slander. They'll say that it's defaming the state of Israel, but they aren't quite ready to say that groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are engaged in anti-Semitism by making that claim. You saw that play out this weekend with the leader of the House Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, when she said that Israel was racist, and she clarified that she did not make an apology, to basically say that she doesn't think that the state of Israel is racist. She just thinks that there are racists in the government. And so that's an ongoing dynamic, and you're seeing it play out between groups like J Street and groups like AIPAC in their endorsements. Jayapal was endorsed by J Street. AIPAC has made a point of calling out that endorsement, saying, are these the sorts of people that you're endorsing? Likewise with Jamal Bowman, likewise with several other members of the Progressive Caucus that have been vocally opposed to the Israeli government. So the second thing that I'm focused on is Iran and the ongoing efforts of this administration to negotiate a diplomatic settlement of some sort to contain Iran's nuclear program. Those negotiations have most recently been taking place in Oman. They are taking the form of, effectively, the negotiators of the two sides are, as we understand it, sort of sitting in separate rooms in the capital, Muscat, and the Omanis are basically passing messages between those two negotiators. Since the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 2015 nuclear deal negotiated by former President Obama, Iran has massively stepped up its enrichment. The International Atomic Energy Agency says that Iran has currently been detected enriching uranium to above 83% purity. That's just shy of the 90% threshold that is considered to be weapons grade uranium. There's no civilian reason to enrich uranium that much. A nuclear reactor for civilian power purposes is only at 3% enrichment. And there's a question of, I guess, there are members of Congress who will make the point that, when the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those bombs were not at 90% enriched uranium. They were much, much lower percentages. So the question is whether this 90% threshold, whether Iran has effectively already exceeded it. And the negotiations themselves are interesting. Rob Malley, who negotiated the 2015 nuclear deal, has been placed on leave by the State Department in what I think can only be described as mysterious circumstances. It's very strange what is going on in his case. He is apparently under investigation by the FBI for mishandling of classified information. The most detailed accounts of this, although it's not clear that they are in any way accurate, are coming actually from Iranian state media. The Tehran Times reported that Malley might have given some of this information to Iranian deal makers, brokers, media figures. The State Department refuses to clarify why he was suspended. In the meantime, these negotiations seem to be continuing. President Biden has said that the JCPOA is dead, but he wouldn't say that. He also said that he would not say that publicly. He was recorded on video saying that in November. But the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and others continue to say that they would prefer a diplomatic solution to this problem before they turn to military or other options. So, the question is then, how do you do that? And there's been a lot of discussion in the air about whether they'd pursue an informal agreement of some kind and a entente and understanding, whatever you can call it. Congress is starting to push back. The chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCall, has said that even an informal agreement would have to be reviewed by Congress. So it's not clear at the moment how the Biden administration will proceed under those circumstances, or whether they can even get a deal. And then lastly, sort of speaking of deal making, there's the ongoing diplomatic push focused on Saudi Arabia to expand the Abraham Accords, to find additional countries that will make peace with Israel, that will normalize relations with Israel. The Biden administration has had a very rocky relationship with Saudi Arabia, not just on Israel. Biden said during the election campaign, during the primary, that he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. He refused to shake hands with Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia. He, fist bumped him. And there is a mismatch, I guess I would say, between where Saudi Arabia's expectations are of what they can get and what the Biden administration is going to give. So publicly, the Saudis still say that they will not make peace until there is a negotiated settlement with the Palestinians. That's the terms of the Arab Peace Initiative from the early 2000s. Privately, the Saudis have apparently been telling people that they want a few things. They want a U.S. security guarantee, an explicit guarantee of their security, and they want a nuclear agreement for their civilian nuclear program that does not have the non-proliferation standards that the U.S. typically seeks. So, for example, the United Arab Emirates also has a civilian nuclear reactor, but they have complied with what is called the gold standard of non-proliferation, which is that they will not enrich and they will not reprocess uranium. The Saudis want a nuclear program without those strings attached. So far, the U.S. doesn't seem interested in doing that. And there have been other problems. This is true with Israel as well. So to a certain extent, these countries are making their own deals. They are a bit of a sideshow from what the Biden administration, I think, is overwhelmingly focused on, which is the war in Ukraine and the U.S. relationship rivalry with China. That is where both Democrats and Republicans have quite a bit of overlap in their views that there is a need to step up U.S. efforts to counter China. Most countries in the region, in the Middle East, want to effectively stay out of that. Saudi Arabia has negotiated a sort of entente with Iran that was brokered by China, and the United Arab Emirates, which did sign on to which was the first country to sign on to the Abraham Accords. Benjamin Netanyahu said that he wants to visit the UAE and he hasn't been able to. Reportedly, that has repeatedly happened because of his rhetoric around Iran, that many of the Arab countries seem to want sort of no problems with their neighbors. And the idea that this is some sort of anti-Iran alliance is not something that the Arab countries in the Middle East seem particularly interested in. So there's a mismatch there. And then on Ukraine, the Arab states effectively think that this is a European problem. They want nothing to do with it. And they just aren't interested in signing on. So the Biden administration, particularly with Saudi Arabia, has had to recalibrate their expectations of what Saudi Arabia is willing to do. And it's not clear that they can get to the finish line on some sort of normalization deal without giving Saudi Arabia a lot more than what they're currently willing to give. Jason, I think that's about 15 minutes from me. I think that's my view of things. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has them.
Thank you, Andrew. Very informative here, and really appreciate your reporting and everything you do to keep us informed. Tell us about you have a press pass to the State Department. Tell us what it's like being an insider now at the State Department and spending so much of your time there.
Sure. It's an interesting place. It's kind of funny. You have a State Department press corps of reporters from around the world, and an expectation from them that the State Department will have an answer about anything and everything. So at the start of the meeting, the reporter from the Associated Press gets a few questions in about whatever the topic of the day is, but then you'll have a reporter from the Maldives asking what the State Department thinks about the elections in the Maldives, and they may or may not have an answer about that. So yeah, it's an interesting room to be in. I don't know that they're very good at spinning, let's say.
Okay, excellent. We know that you had this major reporting win earlier this year, where you discovered that James Cavallaro, who is being appointed to a State Department post, had tweeted some really incendiary things. Do you want to tell anybody on our audience briefly about that and what the fallout has been, and what have there been any updates? Is anybody in Cavallaro's camp continuing to push him, or give us an update there on what happened?
Sure. So for background, I discovered that a U.S. nominee to a human rights position in the Organization of American States, Professor James Cavallaro, had an extensive background of making incendiary comments about Israel and about Democratic elected officials. He was a supporter of Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primary, and he had, among other things, described President Biden as a senile gaffe machine. He had said that Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was bought, paid for, and controlled by the pro-Israel lobby. And as a result of my reporting, the Biden administration withdrew his nomination for that position. He has claimed that that was exclusively because of his advocacy for the position that Israel is an apartheid state, that is committing the crime of apartheid, as human rights groups describe it. I think this goes to what I was saying before about there is an ongoing effort to pick this particular point that Israel is an apartheid state and say that it is normatively true, that is just a factual claim, that because experts, quote unquote experts in international law, claim that Israel is an apartheid state, therefore you should be able to say that without any repercussions. And so since I reported that initially, he received the backing of, I believe it was more than 60 human rights groups, including Amnesty International, including Human Rights Watch, effectively asserting that claim that he should be reinstated to that nomination, and that basically claiming that Israel is an apartheid state is a perfectly valid thing for a normal political figure to do. As I understand it, since then that position is closed. I believe the elections happened earlier this month, but it remains absolutely something to be on the lookout for. It's particularly on the sort of left flank of the Democratic Party and in the human rights community. This effort is ongoing.
Andrew, we'll conclude with this. You're a journalist, not an advisor to the Israeli government, but based on what you're seeing in Washington, if you had to advise the Israelis on what they could do to win back Democratic voters and get the, maybe not the far left end, but more Democrats on board with Israel than are currently, what could they do to bring the Democratic Party to where it's been historically, which is a pro-Israel party?
I mean, I guess I would say two things. One, we put a pin in what they would do and just say, in Jayapal's clarification letter about what she meant when she called Israel a racist society, she said that actually she just meant that there are racists in the Netanyahu government. Now, the previous government, which was led by Yair Lapid, did not have, this overwhelming support. The same people who were critical of the current government were critical of that government. So it's I think a convenient excuse that the current government is composed the way that it is and has some of these figures like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are, far right figures who make incendiary statements all the time. So it is convenient for critics of Israel that this government is in power. So on the one hand, I do think that it's somewhat pretextual. The second thing, though, I would say is, one of the reasons why I would be loath to give advice is that the person who knows better than anyone that this government is composed the way it is Benjamin Netanyahu. He has configured a government such that he can have a majority in probably the only way that it can be done. And so, do I think Benjamin Netanyahu is particularly interested in these judicial reforms that have sparked, months of mass protests? It's not obvious to me that he is. I think he would much rather be focused on Iran. He'd much rather be focused on expanding the Abraham Accords. But his coalition partners and the structure of his coalition demand that some kind of these reforms go through. And so, the short answer to your question, I think, is that everyone would like to get past this judicial reform issue, and it sounds like with this latest vote on the particular measure, I believe it's on the reasonableness standard, that then it might enter a period of negotiation where the sides can actually get together and reach some sort of constitutional compromise. But somehow getting past this issue, I think, is a major priority and would end a lot of distractions that a lot of Democrats have about the democratic nature of the state of Israel.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you for your reporting. Thank you for keeping the world informed of what's happening in Washington, and especially as it relates to the Jewish community. Doing an excellent job. And our readers, thank you. And I thank you. And thanks to everybody who participated. We greatly appreciate your support for the Algemeiner. We are a nonprofit organization and are fully funded by our supporters. And this was an exclusive call for our supporters. And truly, from everybody at the Algemeiner, thank you so much. And we'll see you again next time. Have a good day. Bye.